Hi, this is going to be the first video of a High Code in 2021 series, a collection of coding patterns that I use a lot nowadays. These have evolved over the years as CSS and JS got better, and hopefully I did as well. I'm going to show you various form controls, 3D basics, and more stuff. The first thing is going to be a checkbox control, and you may be thinking that sounds really simple, but it's not just about styling a checkbox, that is a part, and like the rest, it comes with some really clever tricks that you won't find in your average web resource. But it's also about the control part. How checking and unchecking the checkbox alters the state of other items on the page in a really simple and smart manner. So let's get started, and I hope you enjoy this. So we're going to have an input, type checkbox, give it an ID. This is basically going to be a switch, so let's call it S. This is going to have a label, which we tie to the ID of the checkbox. We're going to change this later. Okay, now let's move on to styling a few things. So we're going to have type checkbox. First thing we do, bump up the font. So font obviously bigger than 1M. Line height, font family. We can tweak this later. Okay, next up, let's add a check mark using a before pseudo element. Okay, now set display grid. Okay, next up we're going to set a grid template, but before, let's decide upon a size, so a dimension for that square that the check mark is going to be in. So let's say 1M. Okay, so here we're going to have grid template. We're going to have a single row equal to that D, and the width of the first column is also going to be equal to that D, and the second column is going to be max content, for which you don't even have autocomplete. Okay, next up, box shadow, inset, 0 offsets, 0 blur, 2 pixel spread. Okay, next up, text align center, and also grid gap. Okay, now having done this, we're going to move on to setting some colors. So we're going to have a color for each state, the normal state that we're initially in. So something like this. So here we're going to set and we're also going to have a selection color or checked color. This is for the checked state, so checked followed by label, and we're going to have that selection color, which is going to be the second color from that list up there. Okay, this is one based index, and of course here we're going to want the color to be that selection color with a fallback of transparent. Okay, so if this is not checked, then okay, but the thing is, we don't want this the border there to disappear when the checkbox is not checked. So now this should do it. But what we want is to also have this red for the whole thing when it's checked, right? So we're going to use here we're going to use the selection color. Okay, and when we uncheck this, it becomes gray again. Now we also want something similar to what we have for this checked state for the hover and focus states. So we're going to have something like hover, and similarly we're going to have something for the focus. Okay, and oops, so okay, and here we're going to have a highlight color, which is going to use the first color from there, And what we're going to do is here use the fallback for the selection color being the highlight, and this falls back on the gray actually. So what we have now, if we hover or if we focus the checkbox, we get this orange, and if we actually check it, we get that crimson. Okay, so this is how I used to handle the change of colors before. I've since switched to a newer technique, which I'll be showing you in a moment. For now, let's go back up here. And I told you about controlling other items on the page, not just its label. So let's say we're going to have a section of advanced controls. So let's say we're going to have something like a div. Let's copy paste this a couple of times. Here in a style attribute, let's set a custom property, and this is going to make the first div stretch across all the columns. So now that we've done this, let's move back here, and we're going to have that section. Let's say it's going to have a height of 9 ems, and let's say it's going to have background, something like that. We don't want that to touch, so let's set a margin there. Let's say it's going to be something like 0.25 ems 0, something like that. Okay, this does it. Let's also hide the actual checkbox, so position absolute, opacity 0. Okay, so now that we've done this, let's get back here, and something that we want is this not to be displayed when the checkbox is not checked. So we are going to check, we're going to tie its height to a switch custom property. So this is initially going to be set to 0, and the height is going to depend on it. So here we're going to have checked followed by the section element, and we're going to set that switch to 1. So now when we check this, you can see that it appears. Now let's also set a transition here. So let's set it to half a second. So transition, that transition duration. Okay, and now you can see that it grows slowly. That's good. Next up, let's style the content, and we're going to give them a background, set a layout here, so display grid, grid template columns, 2 equal columns, right? Let's also set a grid gap, something like that. Let's also set a padding. Okay. Now let me show you one thing. When we uncheck it, we still see that because we still see the padding. So we have to make this depend on the switch custom property. So S times, okay, so that goes as well. But one thing I don't like is that you see those items inside, so those are going to be control wrappers. So for example, we can have a slider here, and here we can have some radio buttons and stuff like that. You see they just shrink with the whole thing, and we don't want that. Oh, something else I want to set here is grid column. So something like this. Okay, so the first one just stretches over everything, and for the rest this one just goes back to the default because we don't have this column custom property defined. So yeah, what I said is I don't want these to just get squished, these items inside. I don't want them to get squished and then expand. I want them to disappear before this thing shrinks. So what we're going to do here is we're going to compute the negation of s. So not s. This is going to be calc 1 minus s. Okay, now having done this, we are going to set a delay here. That's going to be calc not s times the animation duration, transition duration. Okay, and here we're going to have a transition as well. So actually we're just going to copy paste this and alter it, and here the delay is going to be s times that. Okay, and of course we need to transition something, so we're going to have opacity set to that. So now when we uncheck this, you see we've checked it, those items appeared after their parent expanded. So now when we uncheck it, those items are going to just disappear, and then the whole panel shrinks. Now we check it, the panel expands, and then those items appear. And of course we can add this opacity thing here as well. We can also add a transform. So let's say translate not s times minus 100%, yeah, or even more, doesn't matter. Scale s. We can even add a filter here. So we can make a bunch of things depend on that s custom property. And so let's say blur calc. Just because we can, it doesn't mean we should, but I'm just showing you that we can do this sort of stuff. Not 9 ems, that's going to be horrible. 9 pixels is more sane. Oh, and that's actually not s, because we want that when the thing is not. Okay, so now, oh, that's why the transform didn't work. Now it should work. Okay, you see that? Yay! That is starting to look like something cool. Okay, next step is I want to show you how I do this nowadays with the same technique as here. So using this switch custom property. So what I will be doing is take those from here and this is going to be valid for everything following our checkbox, right? So everything is going to get that s initially like that. We're going to take this one out. Everything else gets that s switched to 1. Right here we're going to have actually just a highlight flag, which we turn to 1 here after setting it to 0 here. So we're going to have highlight set to 0. We're going to have not highlight 1 minus highlight. Okay, so here the color is going to be, we're going to set it. We're not going to leave it like this, but for now let's just do that. And here we'll be setting a filter. So filter not highlight, sorry. So if we don't hover it or focus it, so for example now it's focused, let's click elsewhere, right? Of course this one is not going to work anymore. So the color right here is going to, let's make it, it's going to be an RGBA, and we're going to use that color that we want for the checked state, so the second color in the list, and it's going to have an alpha of S. So when the thing is checked, it's crimson and you can see it, okay, when it's unchecked. But we also want to make everything else crimson when the thing is checked. So here comes color interpolation. So we're going to have function interpolate colors, and we're going to have a color list. We're going to have a factor k and its complementary j, and in our case k is going to be S and j is going to be not S. And here we'll be having some channels, so the channels red, green, blue, red, green and blue. Okay, next up we're going to have a list of arguments, which is going to be initially empty, and then we're going to have a loop. So for each channel function we're going to have, okay, we're going to call another function that's going to be similar, but it's going to be per channel. So interpolate channel, and here we're going to have the channel function name, okay, and we're going to return calc, and first up we're going to have j multiplied with, again we need to interpolate this, and we call the function a function name, and we use the first color in the list, and then we're going to have something very similar for the second term. So the second term is k times almost the same thing, except we use the second color there, and here we add to the list of arguments, so we use the function and those exact arguments from there, we just pass them on. Okay, and finally we return an RGB value that uses those arguments. Okay, and here what we actually use is interpolate color, and we use that list of colors, and we use S and not S. Okay, so now we have hover, right, or focus, right, and we can check this and it turns red. And we can also add a transition, so transition, that's transition duration, and here we can have transition inherit. Okay, okay, so you can see that we basically have multiple states here. So this is not focused, not hovered, and it's unchecked. It's this light gray. It's hovered or it's focused, right? It's that orange. Now it's both focused and checked, and we have this red, and oops, let's bring it back. Now it's like that darker gray, and it's not hovered and it's not focused. Okay, now one more problem we can have here. For example, let's say we're going to have these two elements, we can have them inside a form, so for better grouping, so this section is not a sibling of the input anymore, so that ruins our styling, but we can do it with a tiny bit of JS. So let's say we're going to have a form there. We're not going to do anything there. Okay, so let's say we're going to have something like that. Now we are going to set this, we're going to take it out, and we're going to set it on all elements, right? And then on the body we're going to set that switch to 0. We can just remove all that stuff from there. And now in the JS, we're going to have add event listener, change, and we're going to have some stuff there, false. Okay, now here, we're going to get to the event target. I hope I spelled that right. Okay, then we're going to have document body style set property, and here we'll be using the ID, so the target ID, and we're going to set this to 1 times the target checked value. So now you can see this working again. Now a few more tiny tweaks I want to set. You see, when these items appear, they appear from outside their parent, and let's just set overflow hidden to prevent that. Okay, now something else I'd like to set here is the cursor. So I will be setting this both on the checkbox and on the label. Okay, much nicer. And of course we can do a lot of things. For example, here we can use an HSL value, so I don't know, 345, and we can do something like calc. Something like this, right? So it's that red, and then it goes to gray as it gets unchecked, something like that. Or we can leave the saturation alone and mingle with the hue. So for example, that something like this, I don't even know, something like that, let's say. Yeah, that's a calc. That's why the error. Now it should work. So as you can see, it goes to a blue. I think it's going to be a bit more clear if we don't do the opacity thing. So as you saw, it starts out red when it's really small and then goes to this blue, right? So we can control a lot of properties, not just those that you see here. And of course, you can control more than just one section and its children. You can control a lot of other elements on the page, but I won't go deeper into that. You can play with it further. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you like the work that I'm putting out for over 8 years now, and you want me to be able to do more in the future, please consider supporting it. You can do so by being a cool cat and becoming a patron on Patreon. The link is going to be in the description. Or you can get me something off my Amazon wishlist. Again, the links are going to be in the description. Or you can at least share this to show the world what can be done with CSS these days. Because honestly, I think it's pretty damn cool. In any event, thanks for watching, and until next time. Bye!